Hi everybody, it's Christine with Zeidman Development, and today I'd like to walk you through using criteria sets that are specific to a template in Importacular. So we have another video that walks you through adjusting your default criteria sets. That does affect all of your templates, but this is going to be working with criteria sets for a specific template. So you can see that I've already opened my template, and then I'm going to come up to the top and click on criteria sets. There are 4 different options here. We have individual constituent set, organization constituent set, individual relationship set, and organization relationship set. Individual constituent and organization constituent set are both available for all users. Individual relationship set requires the individual relationship destination, and organization relationship requires the organization relationship destination. The 2 relationship destination related sets help you look for relationships as you're importing so that you don't duplicate a relationship. So if you already have the constituent and the individual relationship, that individual relationship set is going to look to see if you already have that relationship so that you can update that relationship rather than add a duplicate relationship. So that's what those are. So for that sake, we're going to look at the constituent sets today. And I'm going to focus on the individual constituent set. The organization constituent set follows the same logic. It just has a few different fields. So let's go ahead and open our individual constituent set. So the first thing that I want to point out is that this is not the default criteria set that comes in Importacular. I have already made some changes to this. So if it looks different than what you see in your system, that may be because you're using the default, or it may be because someone at your organization has already made some changes. The second thing that I want to point out is that there are definitely going to be different reasons behind different changes. So there is no way that I can give you an exhaustive list of what you should or shouldn't put in your criteria sets, because it really depends heavily on what you have in your data source, what you want to match to in Raiser's Edge, and what your specifics are. So for example, if I'm doing an alumni import, I may want to use an advanced setting and link to a query of known alumni in Raiser's Edge. Using a query definitely slows down the matching process, but it can increase your accuracy. That's why I'd only want to use that query on an alumni import and not on a board member import. Similarly, some imports may not have that constituent ID, and if you find that you need to speed up your matching process, you may want to remove sets that don't work with your data. So you may want to remove that constituent ID in that case. I have left it here because if I have the constituent ID in my file, that is a very reliable way to match records. Hence why it is the first row in this grid. So this grid works from top to bottom to match the records in your data source to the records in Raiser's Edge. So records are going to start at the top. Does it have a matching constituent ID? If it does, those 2 records will be linked, and when you get to the review screen, you'll see an update because the constituent ID is an exact match. An exact match means that you see an update at the review screen level. If there is no constituent ID, then the data goes to the second row. So Importacular will compare, does the constituent in the data source have the same first name and the same email address as the record in Raiser's Edge? If it does, again, we're going to see an update in the review screen because, again, we have an exact. So first name and email have been linked together. If they match, we get an exact and we see an update in the review screen. If it doesn't have the same first name and email and it doesn't have the same constituent ID, then it goes to the third row. First name and equivalence, surname, address 1 and equivalence. And let's go ahead and open that one because it's extended beyond the screen. So we would be looking for first name equivalence, surname, address and address equivalence, and the postal code. So the equivalents here for first name refer to known nicknames. So things like William, Bill, and Will, Charles and Chuck, Elizabeth, Liz, Lizzie, and Beth, things like that. Known nicknames are built into the equivalence table. If you see equivalents that are consistent for your database, you can add to that equivalence table. Address equivalents are similar. It's things like street and ST, Ave and avenue, boulevard and BLVD. Those, again, are set up in the address equivalence tables. You can always add to that at another time if you find things that are in your system that aren't showing up there. So for this match, a record would have to match all of these things in order to be considered a good match. A good match will also add the update in the review screen, but you would see at the end of the row that it was a good match, not an exact match. The fourth row is going to look at the surname and the spouse, as well as the address and the postal code. So this row would help if you are working with spouse records, but you want to add the information to the constituent who is head of household. However, if you do this, you do want to make sure you don't overwrite name fields or things like that. That's just a side. But this would allow you to match to a spouse. I've put that underneath my first name and equivalents because if the name matches, I want to use that first. So the fourth row is going to be there. The last row is first name and equivalents, surname, postal code. And that one is set to a poor match. I have that set to a poor match because I want to review those records to see if I think they're the same person or not. And poor matches will give us a decide in the review screen. Now, these are some really good matches and they may be really helpful, but what if I want to add something else? So let's go ahead and click on our green circle with the white plus sign. And let's add our alias. So we want to use an alias lookup field. We've mapped it in our template that we have an alias set up for our ID for a third-party software. We want that alias to be a lookup field. So I've added that here. Let's go ahead and save that. Now, right now that alias is at the bottom of our list, but that alias is an ID number, so it's going to be far more reliable than some of our other options here. So let's go ahead and move that alias up. And let's change it to a good or an exact. Now, as I mentioned earlier, we do have some advanced settings so that we could work with a query of alumni. So let's go ahead and create a new set so I can show you those advanced settings. So down in the bottom corner, we have our advanced options. We could restrict to a query. We can filter on an attribute, or we could filter on a constituent code. For the sake of right now, I'm going to filter on my constituent code of my alumni. If I had a specific query of alumni from a certain class, I could look for that query, things like that. We're going to stick with our constituent code for now. So we're going to say if their constituent code is alumni, first name is the same, first name equivalents, and surname. We could also add that class of. Now, something you may want to consider because of students who change names, you may want to work with something else in this. You may or may not want the surname. If you have people who have changed that maiden name to the surname, you want to look up by a maiden name instead of a surname, you can do some different things there. But just for now, let's say first name, surname, class of, and we have that constituent code of alumni. So let's go ahead and add that. Again, this is much more reliable than some of our others. So we would move it above the first name and postal code. And I would even move it above the spouse, but I would leave it below the address. So let's change that here so it's a good. And that way, if we match the first name, surname, having that constituent code of alumni and the class of, we're going to call that a good match. I'm going to go ahead and close this. And what would happen with those is that when we run our data, we would see everything in the review screen showing how we've matched our constituents. So just so you can see that, let's go ahead and do a quick match on just a couple rows. So we can see we have two updates here. We can see our record down below. And if we scroll to the far right, we can see that this was an exact match. So we know that he matched exactly, most likely on his email and his first name, unless our file had a constituent ID. So I hope that this is helpful in helping you see how to use those criteria sets with a specific template. Thanks for joining me today, and I hope you have a great day.